The sky above Dakathani Prime was on fire. Burning wreckage rained down from the heavens as towering plumes of smoke swallowed the horizon. The once thriving human colony had become a graveyard of shattered buildings, its streets filled with the screams of the dying and the roar of incoming fire. Captain Ilias Voss wiped the blood from his forehead, breathing heavily as he crouched behind the rubble of a fallen skyscraper. His ears rang from the last explosion, but he forced himself to focus. The Kravik Dominion had come to finish what they started. A deep, inhuman voice crackled over the open comms. Resistance is futile. Your people are outnumbered. Surrender now, and you will be spared. Voss clenched his jaw. These aliens had wiped out 3 human colonies already. Every time, they promised mercy. Every time, they slaughtered everyone anyway. There would be no surrender. Not today. Through the smoke, Voss spotted a Kravik dropship descending, its massive shadow stretching over the city ruins. The ship's bay doors groaned open, revealing hulking Kravik shock troopers, 8-foot-tall war beasts, their armor gleaming under the firelit sky. Each carried a plasma rifle powerful enough to turn a man into ash. Voss whispered into his comm, "Get ready." Around him, hidden within the debris, his soldiers waited. A ragtag mix of ex-military, miners, and engineers, the last defenders of Dakathani. They were outnumbered 20-1, but they had one advantage: the cloaking device. The Kravik soldiers marched forward, their glowing eyes scanning for survivors. They moved with terrifying precision, their heavy boots shaking the ground. Then one of them froze. A flicker of movement caught its eye. It turned, just as a human fighter decloaked right in front of it. Boom! A shotgun blast shattered its helmet, spraying dark blood onto the ground. Before the rest could react, all hell broke loose. The hidden resistance fighters sprang into action, their cloaks flickering as they unloaded gunfire into the enemy ranks. Plasma bolts and bullets ripped through the air. The Kravik soldier staggered backward, roaring as a well-placed grenade tore off its leg. Another tried to activate its shield but was tackled from behind, a combat knife driven into its throat. Voss darted through the chaos, his rifle barking as he dropped 2 enemies in quick succession. "Push forward," he shouted. Sarah Kane, his second in command, moved like a ghost, appearing and disappearing mid-combat, slicing through the enemy with her enhanced reflexes. She fired 2 rounds into a Kravik officer's chest, then twisted to avoid a plasma blast. "They're bringing in reinforcements," she yelled. Voss turned, and his heart stopped. Above them, a colossal Kravik war mech descended from the dropship, its massive metal frame crushing a wrecked car beneath it. Its glowing red visor locked onto Voss. Target acquired. A whirring noise filled the air as the mech's arm-mounted plasma cannon charged up. "Move-y!" Voss shouted. A blinding blue beam fired, vaporizing the ground where he had stood just seconds before. The shockwave threw him back, slamming him against a broken wall. His vision blurred, his body screamed in pain. Through his dazed vision, he saw the mech's giant metal foot stomp forward. Its cannon glowed again, preparing to finish him. Then, an explosion rocked the battlefield. Boom! A well-placed rocket slammed into the mech's shoulder, causing it to stagger back. Voss turned to see Lieutenant Ramirez, holding a smoking rocket launcher. "Get the hell up, Captain," he shouted. Voss pushed himself up, ignoring the pain. The battle wasn't over yet. The Kravik were falling back, but they weren't retreating. No, they were regrouping. Above them, more warships appeared, their cannons aiming downward. The next wave was coming. A new voice echoed through the air, a deep guttural tone filled with cold amusement. "You fight well. For insects." Voss looked up. From the largest warship, a towering figure descended, clad in ornate alien armor. His red eyes gleamed through his helmet. High Commander Tyrax, the butcher of 3 human worlds. The Kravik commander strode forward, completely unfazed by the destruction around him. His warriors parted to let him through. The battlefield fell silent. Xyrax stopped a few feet away from Voss. The alien tilted his head, studying the bloody human captain like a predator eyeing a wounded animal. "Your struggle is admirable, but pointless," Xyrax said. "Your people will kneel, or they will burn." Voss spat blood onto the ground. "You talk too much." Xyrax chuckled. "And you die too easily." Without warning, he moved, so fast that Voss barely saw him coming. A crushing blow sent Voss skidding across the ground, his ribs cracking on impact. Pain flared through his body, but he forced himself up. Xyrax didn't give him the chance. The alien lunged forward, grabbing Voss by the throat and lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Voss struggled, gasping for air as Xyrax's clawed fingers tightened. "Is this all humanity has left?" Xyrax mused. Then a gunshot rang out. A bullet slammed into Xyrax's helmet, making him stumble back. His grip loosened. Voss crashed to the ground, coughing violently. Sarah stood there, gun raised, eyes blazing. "Hands off my captain." Xyrax turned his head slowly, touching the dented side of his helmet. He let out a low, rumbling growl. "Kill them all." The Kravik soldiers surged forward, their weapons charging up. Gunfire erupted once again. Voss forced himself to his feet. His vision swam, but he refused to fall. Not now. Not ever. He grabbed his comm, switching to the emergency frequency. "Activate the cloaking field. Now." A second later, the entire battlefield shifted. A massive pulse of energy radiated from a hidden device deep underground. The air shimmered, and then suddenly, the entire human stronghold vanished. The Kravik soldiers stopped mid-charge, confused. Their scanners glitched, unable to detect anything. Xyrax's eyes narrowed. "What?" Voss wiped the blood from his lips and smirked. "Didn't see that coming, did you?" And then, from the invisible darkness, the real fight began. Darkness swallowed the battlefield as the cloaking field activated. One moment, the ruins of Dakathani were a war zone filled with fire and gunfire. The next, everything vanished. The Kravik soldiers halted, their glowing visors scanning in confusion. Their motion sensors flickered wildly, unable to detect a single life sign. High Commander Xyrax stood still, his eyes narrowing. He tilted his head slightly, analyzing the shift in the battlefield. "Impressive trick," he muttered. "But tricks won't save them." Then, from the silence, the humans struck. The first Kravik trooper's head exploded as a sniper round punched through its skull. Before its body could hit the ground, a second alien collapsed, its throat slashed open by a blade that appeared from thin air. The others reacted fast, spinning around and firing blindly, their plasma bolts ripping through empty space. Sarah Kane moved like a phantom, her cloaking device flickering as she weaved through the chaos. She slid under a Kravik warrior, drove her knife into its gut, and twisted hard. Dark alien blood sprayed across her face. She yanked the blade free, disappearing into the smoke before the others could target her. Ramirez and his squad popped in and out of visibility, using the flickering effect of their cloaks to fire and vanish, confusing the enemy. Plasma bolts lit up the battlefield, but the Kravik couldn't hit what they couldn't see. Voss stayed low, moving through the wreckage, his pulse hammering in his chest. They had one chance to turn this fight around, and it was working. The Kravik were frustrated, their formations breaking. They were built for open war, for overwhelming power, but against a shadow war, they struggled. A Kravik officer growled, slamming its armored fist into the ground. "Switch to infrared. Detect their heat signatures." The warriors obeyed, their visors shifting colors. But it was too late. Boom. A hidden EMP mine detonated beneath them, sending a shockwave of blue energy outward. The Kravik's armor short-circuited, their sensors blacked out, and their weapons flickered uselessly. The humans struck harder. Voss leaped from cover, his rifle barking as he emptied an entire magazine into a Kravek's exposed head. Ramirez tackled another, shoving a detonator into its chest armor before rolling away. A heartbeat later, boom! The alien exploded into a mess of flesh and metal. Sarah's voice crackled in the comms, breathless but steady. "We're pushing them back. They don't know how to fight blind." Voss exhaled sharply, eyes scanning the battlefield. They had the upper hand, but it wouldn't last. The Kravek were adapting too fast. If Tagrax figured out a counter to the cloaking device, their one advantage would be gone. As if reading his mind, Cyrax lifted his hand. A faint hum filled the air. Then, without warning, his body pulsed with energy. The shockwave rippled outward, disrupting the cloaking field. One by one, the human fighters flickered back into visibility, completely exposed. Cyrax smiled. "I see you now." Voss cursed under his breath. The Kravek rallied instantly, their weapons reactivating. They turned their guns on the now visible resistance fighters, opening fire with brutal precision. A plasma bolt grazed Ramirez's leg, sending him sprawling with a grunt of pain. Another blast hit a young fighter named Cole square in the chest, vaporizing him on impact. "Fall back! Now!" Voss roared. The humans scrambled for cover as the Kravek pushed forward, their monstrous war cries shaking the air. A massive shadow loomed overhead. The Kravek war mech stepped forward, its plasma cannon charging up once more. Its glowing red visor locked onto the fleeing humans, calculating their movements. Voss's mind raced. He needed to take it out now, or it would wipe them all out. Sarah shouted over the comm, "We have one missile left. But it won't pierce the mech's armor unless we get inside," Voss finished. Sarah hesitated. "That's suicide." Voss tightened his grip on his rifle. "Then let's make it count." Without another word, he sprinted toward the mech, zigzagging to avoid enemy fire. Ramirez, gritting his teeth against the pain, grabbed the last rocket launcher from their destroyed supply crate. "You better know what you're doing, Captain." Voss kept running. The mech targeted him, its cannon glowing brighter. 5 seconds until it fired. He leaped onto a fallen transport truck, using it as a springboard to launch himself toward the mech's back. He grabbed onto a vent, hauling himself up just as the cannon fired at where he'd been standing seconds before. The shockwave knocked over an entire building, sending debris crashing to the ground. Voss climbed, fast, gripping onto whatever he could find. His boots slipped on the metal, his fingers burned against the heat. The mech shook violently, trying to throw him off. 3 seconds. The war machine's backup turrets activated, twisting toward him. Ramirez fired the rocket. The missile streaked toward the mech's visor, blinding it for a split second. That was all Voss needed. He reached the central power core, yanked a grenade from his belt, and shoved it deep into the vent system. 1 second. He jumped. Boom. The grenade detonated inside the mech's exposed system, sending a chain reaction of explosions ripping through its core. The giant war machine staggered, sparks flying from its joints. A horrible whining sound filled the air. Then, with a deafening crash, the mech collapsed, its smoking remains crumbling into the ruins. A stunned silence followed. Then the humans erupted into cheers. But Voss didn't smile, because High Commander Kyrax was still standing, and he was laughing. "You think this is victory?" Kyrax's voice was calm, amused. "You've only delayed your destruction." A deep rumbling shook the battlefield. Voss turned his head, his stomach dropping. In the sky above, the main Kravik fleet was arriving. Massive dreadnought-class warships loomed over the burning city, their weapons glowing with power. Kyrax took a step forward, unbothered by his losses. "Now let me show you the true meaning of war." Voss's blood turned to ice. The real battle was about to begin. The sky burned red as the Kravik fleet descended. Their warships hovered like predators, their cannons glowing, ready to unleash devastation. Voss clenched his fists, feeling the weight of inevitable destruction pressing down on him. They had barely survived the ground assault. Now an entire armada loomed over them. Smoke curled from the wreckage of the fallen war mech. The last of the human resistance fighters regrouped in the shattered ruins of Dakathani. They were bruised, battered, outnumbered, and outgunned. The air smelled of charred metal and burnt flesh. The victory they had just tasted now felt hollow. Sarah wiped the blood off her face, her breathing heavy. "We can't fight a whole fleet, Voss." "We won't have to," he muttered. His mind raced. There had to be a way. Something they hadn't tried yet. Axedrax stood atop a pile of rubble, watching them like a god judging insects. The Kravek commander was calm, his glowing red eyes filled with amusement. He had lost warriors, he had lost a mech, but none of it mattered. His forces were limitless. The humans were not. "You fought well," Axedrax called out, his voice mockingly smooth. "It is always admirable to watch the weak struggle before the end." Ramirez cursed under his breath. "I swear, I'm gonna put a bullet in that guy's skull." Voss ignored the taunt. He studied the enemy fleet, noting the positions of the warships, the orbital bombardment patterns, the gaps in their formation. There was always a weakness. There had to be. Then he saw it. A single Kravek dreadnought, larger than the rest, positioned at the center of the fleet. Its hull pulsed with energy conduits, feeding power to the other ships, if it was what he thought it was. Voss turned to Sarah. "That command ship. If we take it out, the others might fall with it." She followed his gaze, her brow furrowed. "You think it's a control hub?" "More than that." He pointed to the faint blue distortions around the smaller ships. "It's generating a networked shield. The fleet's entire defense grid is linked to that one ship." Ramirez's eyes widened. "If we blow it up, the whole fleet loses its protection." Voss nodded. "And without shields, they'll be vulnerable to their own bombardment. We just have to make sure the Kravek commanders don't have time to adjust." Sarah exhaled, thinking fast. "All right. We'd need a hijack team to infiltrate the dreadnought and sabotage the core. But how do we even get up there?" Voss turned to the wrecked war mech. A plan formed in his mind. "We fly." The Kravek dropships had arrived minutes ago, unloading fresh reinforcements onto the battlefield. If they could seize one, they could slip past enemy detection and reach the command ship. It was risky, insanely risky. But it was their only chance. Ramirez grinned. "Hell of a plan, Captain." Sarah nodded. "Then let's move." Before they glassed the whole planet, the mission was set. The last of the resistance fighters prepared for their most dangerous operation yet. There would be no turning back. The ruins of Dakathani provided just enough cover to creep toward the Kravek landing zone. Dozens of alien dropships were parked in a clearing, their engines still humming from their descent. Kravek warriors patrolled the area, their weapons scanning for survivors. Sarah and Ramirez silently took out the nearest guards with quick, brutal efficiency. Knives flashed, bodies fell. No alarms. Voss led the team toward a smaller dropship, one with an open loading ramp. The moment they stepped inside, an alarm blared. A Kravek pilot inside the cockpit turned, startled, but before it could react, Sarah put a bullet between its eyes. The ship's interior was bathed in red warning lights. They had seconds before reinforcements arrived. Voss jumped into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. "Hold on." The engines roared to life. Outside, Kravek warriors realized what was happening. They rushed toward the ship, opening fire. Plasma bolts rattled against the hull, scorching metal. Sarah and Ramirez returned fire, holding them off. Then, with a violent lurch, the dropship lifted off. The ground below blurred away as they shot into the sky, weaving between the towering wreckage of Dakathani. Voss pushed the engines to their limit. Above them, the fleet loomed, growing larger by the second. If the Kravek realized they weren't friendly, They'd be blasted out of the sky before they got close. The comm crackled. An alien voice filled the cabin. Dropship 47. Confirm clearance code for docking. Sarah and Ramirez exchanged looks. Voss's mind raced. No clearance code. No way through. Unless. He slammed a button on the console, switching to an open transmission frequency. This is Dropship 47. Emergency protocol. Hostiles on the ground are overwhelming our position. We need immediate landing clearance before they breach. Silence. For a second, Voss thought it wouldn't work. Then, understood. Dropship 47. Proceed to docking bay. Sarah exhaled sharply. I can't believe that actually worked. Ramirez grinned. Guess even aliens have bad comm security. The dreadnought's hangar bay doors slid open as the ship approached. Voss guided the dropship inside, touching down smoothly. The moment they landed, the real battle began. A squad of Kravik guards marched toward them, expecting a routine arrival. They never got the chance to react. The resistance fighters stormed out of the ship, weapons blazing. The Kravik fell before they could raise alarms. The team moved fast, pushing through the corridors of the massive warship. The reactor core was their target. If they could overload it, the entire vessel would tear itself apart and take the fleet's defenses down with it. But time was against them. Xerax was watching. Back on the battlefield, the High Commander's eyes narrowed. He had allowed the humans to escape. He had let them take a dropship. And now he saw where they had gone. A slow, cruel smile formed on his lips. He activated a command panel on his wrist. A silent signal was sent. Inside the dreadnought, as Voss and his team neared the reactor chamber, the ship sealed itself shut. Bulkhead doors slammed down, locking the corridors. Defense turrets whirred to life. Sirens blared. And from the shadows of the reactor chamber, dozens of Kravik elites emerged, weapons ready. At the center of them, waiting, was Xerax himself. He had been expecting them. The mission had just become a trap. The doors slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside the reactor chamber. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the dreadnought's power core vibrating through the metal floor. Voss gripped his rifle tighter. Across the massive chamber, Xerax stood waiting, his crimson eyes glowing like burning embers. Around him, Kravik elite warriors raised their weapons, their armor reflecting the pulsating blue light of the reactor. We walked right into this, Ramirez muttered, his jaw clenched. Sarah's breathing was steady, her eyes locked on Xerax. We finish the mission, or we die trying. Xerax took a slow step forward, his voice smooth and mocking. Brave words, human. But this ends here. Voss didn't wait. He fired first. The shot cracked through the air, but Xerax vanished, his cloaking shield activating. The Kravik elites opened fire, plasma bolts tearing through the chamber. The team dove for cover behind thick metal conduits as the room erupted into chaos. Stick to the plan. Voss shouted over the gunfire. We have to overload the reactor. Ramirez pulled out a detonator. Give me a path. I'll set the charges. Sarah popped up, firing precise shots, taking down 2 Kravik soldiers. Go. We'll cover you. Ramirez sprinted, dodging plasma fire, sliding behind cover as he approached the reactor's control panel. The Kravik moved to intercept, but Voss and Sarah cut them down, their gunfire relentless. Suddenly, Xerax reappeared, moving inhumanly fast, a plasma blade flashing in his hand. Voss barely dodged as the blade slashed past his face, the heat singing his skin. He rolled back, raised his rifle. Xerax kicked it away, sending it clattering across the floor. The Kravik commander loomed over him, his blade raised for the kill. Then, boom! An explosion rocked the ship. For a split second, Xerax hesitated, just long enough for Voss to grab his sidearm and fire. The bullet struck Xerax in the shoulder, making him stumble back. Voss scrambled to his feet, grabbing his knife. "You like fighting up close," he growled. "Let's see how good you really are." T-Rex grinned, his plasma blade whirling to life. The two clashed, blades flashing in the dim reactor glow. Sparks flew as metal met energy. T-Rex was stronger, but Voss was faster, dodging and countering with brutal efficiency. Sarah and Ramirez were still pinned down, Kravik reinforcements pouring into the chamber. The fight was getting worse. Then, over the comms, a voice crackled through. "This is Lieutenant Hayes. The ground team is under heavy fire. We're losing the city." Down below, Dakathani burned. The last of the resistance fighters fought in the streets, holding the line as wave after wave of Kravik troops pushed forward. The sky was filled with streaking fire, debris falling from the orbital battle above. Commander Adira barked orders through the chaos. "Hold your ground. We do not retreat." But the Kravik were too many. Their heavy mechs crushed through the ruins, their firepower turning buildings into rubble. A massive Kravik war machine stomped forward, its cannons glowing, ready to fire. Adira gritted her teeth. They couldn't hold much longer. Then, a shockwave ripped through the sky. The dreadnought above, the very ship where Voss and his team were fighting, began to tremble. On board, Ramirez slammed the final detonator into place. Charges set. Sarah grabbed the comms. "Adira, clear the streets. We're about to bring hell down on them." Adira didn't hesitate. "All unities, a fall base." The resistance fighters scattered, diving into cover as a massive explosion erupted in the sky. The dreadnought's core overloaded. The ship shook violently, warning sirens blaring. Inside the reactor chamber, X-Iraq staggered, looking around in shock. Voss took his chance. He lunged, driving his knife straight into X-Iraq's chest. The Kravik commander's eyes widened in disbelief. He stumbled back, blood dripping from his lips. Voss yanked the blade free. That was for Earth. X-Iraq collapsed. The ship began to break apart. Ramirez shouted, "We need to go. Now." The team raced toward the exit, dodging falling debris as explosions tore through the corridors. They'd reached the hangar bay. Only one dropship remained. Sarah jumped into the pilot's seat, firing up the engines. Voss and Ramirez leaped aboard just as the floor collapsed beneath them, the ship dropping into freefall. Sarah gunned the thrusters, the dropship shooting away as the dreadnought erupted in a fiery explosion. Below, the Kravik panicked as their fleet's shields flickered and failed. The resistance regrouped, launching a counterattack. The tide of battle had turned. But the war was not over yet. The dreadnought exploded in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves through the sky. Metal debris rained down on the battlefield, crashing into burning ruins below. The once invincible Kravik fleet shuddered as its shields collapsed, their protective barrier gone. Voss clutched the side of the dropship as it rocketed away, the blast wave almost knocking them off course. Sarah fought with the controls, her jaw tight with concentration. "Hold on," she shouted as the ship dipped and swerved, dodging flaming wreckage. Ramirez looked back through the rear hatch. "Holy hell!" His voice was barely a whisper. The mighty Kravik warship, the symbol of their dominance, was falling apart, its shattered hull breaking into pieces, vanishing in the firestorm. But there was no time to celebrate. Below, the battle still raged. The Kravik ground forces, though disoriented by the fleet's collapse, were not defeated yet. Their war machines still stomped through the ruins, plasma turrets still fired, and alien soldiers still pushed forward, refusing to surrender. The resistance fighters had fought too hard to let this moment slip away. Adira's voice crackled over the comms. "Voss, the enemy is retreating, but they're still hitting us hard. We need firepower. Now." Voss gritted his teeth. "Sarah, can we use this ship's weapons?" Sarah scanned the controls. "Limited payload, but if we get low enough." Ramirez smirked. "Then let's make it count." The dropship angled downward, speeding toward the battlefield. Voss grabbed the targeting controls as the enemy war machines came into view. Massive Kravik walkers, their heavy cannons still tearing through human defenses. He locked onto the closest one and fired. A streak of missiles launched from the ship, hitting the walker's legs. Metal erupted into flames. The colossal machine buckled, tipping over, crushing a squad of Kravik soldiers beneath it. The resistance forces cheered over the comms. "Keep hitting them," Adira called out. Sarah swerved low, dodging return fire as Voss unleashed more missiles. One by one, the enemy walkers fell, their once imposing forms now nothing but smoking wrecks. But then, a warning light flashed. "Out of ammo," Sarah muttered. That was everything. Voss exhaled. The battlefield was changing. The Kravik, now without their walkers, and with no reinforcements from orbit, were starting to break. Some fought on desperately, but many were falling back, their formations crumbling. The resistance fighters pushed forward, their spirits rekindled. Ramirez loaded his rifle. "Guess it's time to finish this the old-fashioned way." Sarah landed the dropship near the front lines, dust and smoke kicking up as the hatch slammed open. Voss and Ramirez jumped out, weapons ready, diving into the fray alongside their soldiers. The final battle for Dakathani had begun. Blaster fire ripped through the streets. Voss fought shoulder to shoulder with his people, taking down Kravik warriors as they made their last stand. Ramirez stormed forward, grenades in hand, tearing through enemy lines. Sarah covered them from behind, picking off snipers hidden in the ruins. And then Voss saw him. A Kravik captain, still leading his troops, barking orders, refusing to accept defeat. The alien's armor was cracked, his forces dwindling, but his determination unshaken. Voss charged forward, his rifle up. The captain spun, plasma sword igniting in a flash of blue light. Their eyes met. They rushed at each other. The fight was brutal. The Kravik swung his blade, but Voss dodged, countering with a rapid burst of fire. The captain's armor absorbed some of the hits, but not all. He staggered, then lunged again, his blade searing past Voss's shoulder. Pain flared, but Voss didn't stop. He grabbed his knife, and with a final roaring effort, plunged it deep into the alien's chest. The captain froze, his red eyes flickering. Then he collapsed, his weapon slipping from his grasp. Silence followed. The remaining Kravik hesitated, their will shattered. Then, one by one, they dropped their weapons. The battle was over. A deafening silence filled the ruined city. Smoke curled into the sky, the smell of fire and death lingering in the air. The last surviving resistance fighters stood among the wreckage, breathing heavily, battered, but alive. Voss pulled off his helmet, looking around. The cost had been steep. The bodies of their fallen littered the ground, friends and comrades who had given everything for this victory. Sarah stepped beside him, her face smeared with dirt and sweat. "We did it," she whispered. Voss nodded, though his heart felt heavy. "Yeah, but at what cost?" Adira approached, limping from an injury. "The Kravik are retreating across the system. We won Dakathani." Ramirez let out a breath. "Feels surreal." But Voss knew better. The war wasn't over. The Kravik Empire was still out there. This was just one battle in a much larger fight. And yet, as the first rays of sunlight peeked through the smoke-covered sky, there was something new in the air. Hope. The sun rose slowly over Dakathani, its golden light breaking through the thick smoke that still hung in the air. Fires still burned in the ruined city, and the streets were littered with the wreckage of war, destroyed buildings, fallen soldiers, broken weapons. Voss stood on a crumbling balcony, looking out over what was left of the battlefield. His armor was scorched and dented, his face streaked with dirt and dried blood. The wind carried the scent of ash and death, a reminder of how much they had lost. Footsteps approached behind him. Sarah. She stood beside him, silent at first, her eyes scanning the ruins. "I keep thinking I'll wake up," she murmured. that this was all just a nightmare. Voss exhaled, rubbing his sore shoulder. If it is, we haven't woken up yet. Down below, resistance fighters moved through the wreckage, collecting their dead, tending to the wounded, and securing what little supplies remained. The Kravik had been defeated here, but there was no celebration. Only exhaustion. Ramirez sat on the remains of a broken transport, wrapping a bloodied bandage around his arm. "You ever wonder if this fight will ever end?" he asked, glancing at Voss and Sarah. Voss didn't answer immediately. He watched as a group of soldiers carried a fallen comrade past them, placing the body among the countless others lined up along the streets. "We won the battle," he finally said, voice low. "But the war's just getting started." Adira joined them, limping slightly, her face unreadable. "Command just confirmed it. The Kravik fleet is retreating from the sector. Whatever's left of them won't be back anytime soon." Sarah let out a slow breath. "Then we bought some time." Adira nodded. "Maybe. But this wasn't their full strength. It was just one fleet, one invasion force. The Kravik Empire is still out there. They'll want revenge." Voss clenched his fists. He knew she was right. The Kravik wouldn't just accept defeat. They would return, stronger, angrier, more prepared. And next time, humanity might not be so lucky. But for now, they had survived. Across the ruins, a small group of civilians emerged from hiding. They had spent the battle in underground bunkers, hoping to avoid the slaughter. Now, they looked around, hesitant, uncertain. Some wept at the sight of their destroyed home. Others simply stared in numb silence. A young girl, no older than 10, walked slowly toward them, clutching a small battered doll. Her face was smudged with dirt, her eyes hollow with shock. She stopped in front of Voss and the others, looking up at them. "Are the monsters gone?" she asked softly. Voss kneeled, forcing a small, tired smile. "For now." She nodded, gripping her doll tighter. "Will they come back?" Voss's smile faded. He couldn't lie to her. "Maybe." The girl looked down at the ground, silent for a moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took Voss's hand, squeezing it lightly. "Then you have to stop them." Voss stared at her, feeling the weight of every sacrifice, every fallen friend, every lost life settle onto his shoulders. He looked at Sarah, Ramirez, Adira. They all understood. This war wasn't over. It had just begun. A voice crackled over the comms. "This is Fleet Command to all surviving units. Report for regrouping and resupply. Priority orders incoming." Voss stood, releasing the girl's hand. He looked at his team. "We need to get moving. There's more fight ahead." Sarah gave him a tired but determined look. "You think we'll ever get a real victory? One where we don't just survive, but actually win?" Voss glanced at the ruined city, the endless bodies, the exhausted survivors. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know we can't stop fighting." As the team turned to leave, the sun continued to rise, casting its light over the ruins of Dakathani. The battle was over. The war was not.